My heart shattered as my sister Vivian's venomous words sliced through the ambient chatter of the private dining room. "Happy 30th to our pathetic sister who still rents." She announced it loudly, dragging out every single syllable so it could echo off the expensive mahogany walls. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the rim of her imported crystal flute, the sharp clink cutting through the low hum of jazz music playing from the hidden ceiling speakers. She stood up, smoothing down the front of her $2,000 silk dress, and raised her glass high enough for all 43 extended family members to see. The expensive, dimly lit room erupted in cruel, echoing laughter. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as time seemed to stretch into an agonizing crawl. The air conditioning was on full blast, yet a suffocating heat crawled up my neck. Burning tears threatened to betray me, stinging the corners of my eyes, but I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I refused to let them fall. I sat there, frozen, my fingers gripping the edge of the heavy linen tablecloth so hard my knuckles turned white. They mocked my poverty while unknowingly squandering my wealth. They looked down on me with such intense disgust, such misplaced superiority, while sitting in a room I had secretly paid for, drinking wine I had funded. Uncle Harrison leaned back in his plush leather chair, swirling his bourbon over a single, massive ice cube. A smug, ugly smirk twisted his face, the kind of smile a predator gives a trapped animal. "Leave her alone, Vivian," he chuckled, his voice dripping with heavy condescension. "Peasants stay at the bottom. Someone has to make the rest of us look good by comparison. We need people to clean the floors so we can walk on them." More laughter. More clinking of glasses. Aunt Sylvia leaned over and whispered something to my cousin Desmond, pointing at my plain navy blazer, and they both snickered. My fingers trembled with rage under the table. I was the one keeping Uncle Harrison's failing car dealership alive. I was the puppet master holding the strings to their entire fake reality. I wondered, in that very second, looking at their glowing, arrogant faces, how far this situation could escalate before I finally snapped. I wondered what they would do when I sent the text that would ruin their perfect lives. The text I had drafted in my mind 1,000 times during sleepless nights. Execute Order 30. My name is Genevieve. I am 30 years old, and I work as an archivist and appraiser of historical artifacts and rare manuscripts. This is the story of how I let my toxic family hang themselves with a rope they forced me to buy for them. The private dining room at the elite downtown steakhouse was Vivian's choice, naturally. She always demanded the best, the most exclusive, the most obnoxiously overpriced venues for any family gathering. She had reserved their premium room with a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, complete with a dedicated waitstaff hovering in the corners, ready to refill glasses before they were even half empty. I watched her take a delicate sip of the vintage champagne, a bottle that cost more than what she assumed my monthly rent was. The bitter irony washed over me like a cold wave, chilling my bones. She was literally burning through my money to host a party designed specifically to humiliate me on my milestone birthday. Seriously, though, Vivian continued, setting her glass down on the crisp white tablecloth, her voice carrying that specific, piercing pitch she always used when she wanted a captive audience. 30 years old. Still single. Still renting that tiny little shoebox on the wrong side of town. Still playing with old, dusty papers while the rest of us actually build real, impactful lives. Tell me, Genevieve, what exactly is it that you do again? Library stuff? Dusting shelves? I am a historical appraiser, I said quietly. My voice was surprisingly steady, even though my stomach was tied in hard, painful knots. I looked down at the expensive cut of steak on my plate, suddenly feeling entirely devoid of an appetite. Right, she rolled her eyes theatrically, tossing her perfectly styled blonde hair over her shoulder. Playing with old books while we contribute to the real economy. She gestured grandly around the long table. Look at Desmond. His tech startup is booming, hiring dozens of people. Aunt Sylvia just opened her second boutique location in a prime retail spot. And Uncle Harrison is practically running the luxury car market in this city. You are sitting at a table of titans, sis. Try to absorb some of the ambition in the room. Desmond puffed out his chest, adjusting his heavy gold Rolex, making sure the light hit the diamond dial. He knew very well his startup had been saved from going under just a year ago by a mysterious angel investor who bought out his terrible debt. Aunt Sylvia smiled demurely, touching her fake pearls and nodding as if she were a self-made genius. Uncle Harrison just took another long sip of his drink, looking at me like I was a smudge on his expensive windshield. Every single person sitting at that table, looking at me with pity and disdain, was thriving purely because of my silent, invisible intervention. Some people just lack the killer instinct, Vivian. Uncle Harrison chimed in again, cutting his steak with aggressive, sawing motions. There is nothing wrong with being a worker bee, Genevieve. Society needs people at the bottom. It provides balance. You take the bus, we drive the luxury sedans. It is the natural order of things. Don't feel bad about being average. Exactly, Vivian beamed, her eyes sparkling with malicious joy. Though I do worry about what Mom and Dad would think if they could see you now. They were so brilliant, so driven. They would be so incredibly disappointed to see one daughter build a massive wellness empire, while the other is just stagnant. You're just frozen in time, Genevieve. Stagnant. The word hit me right in the center of my chest, knocking the wind out of me. My parents had passed away 7 years ago in a terrible accident. The family assumed they left behind a very modest estate, mostly because my parents were incredibly private people who never flaunted their wealth. They drove ordinary cars, wore sensible clothes, and lived in a normal suburban house. But behind closed doors, my father was a venture capital genius who predicted market shifts with terrifying accuracy, and my mother had amassed a jaw-dropping collection of rare historical artifacts that were worth a fortune. They were wealthy beyond anyone's comprehension in this room. And when they died, they left everything to me. I looked around the table. They were so confident in their cruelty. They had no idea that the ground beneath their feet belonged to me. They didn't know, and because they didn't know, they showed me their true, ugly faces. I sat there in silence, taking the hits, counting the seconds, analyzing every insult. The desperation to be loved by them was slowly draining out of me, drop by drop, replaced by something much colder and much sharper. Will they ever stop? I asked myself, staring at the reflection of the chandelier in my untouched water glass. Or do I have to force them to stop? To understand why I sat there and took their abuse for so long, to understand why I didn't just throw my drink in Vivian's face and walk out 10 minutes into the dinner, you have to understand the museum of pain that was my childhood. I was always the invisible child. In a family that worshipped loud, flashy success and aggressive self-promotion, my quiet diligence was treated as a severe character flaw. My parents were brilliant, yes, but they were also emotionally distant, treating parenting like a corporate project. They loved us, I think, in their own rigid way, but they were deeply flawed in how they showed it. They were obsessed with tangible, boastable results. Vivian always knew how to package her meager, superficial accomplishments into shining trophies, demanding attention and praise. Meanwhile, my genuine hard work, my late night studying, my quiet victories were brushed aside as expected baseline behavior. I was doing what I was supposed to do, so why should I be celebrated? I remember the day the acceptance letter came from my dream Ivy League university. I was 18 years old. I had studied until my eyes physically ached, working 2 part-time jobs at a local bookstore and a cafe just to pay for extra advanced placement tutoring. I sacrificed every weekend, every school dance, every normal teenage experience for that single goal. I held that thick, heavy, cream-colored envelope in my shaking hands at the mailbox. The return address was printed in elegant, embossed lettering. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down my face. I ran all the way down the long driveway and burst into the living room, my heart hammering against my ribs, ready to share the greatest news of my life. Instead of a receptive audience, I found the entire family crowded around Vivian. She was sitting in the center of the large leather sectional couch, sobbing hysterically into a pile of crumpled tissues. She was still wearing her bright blue cheerleading uniform. She had failed to make the final cut for the regional competitive squad. Aunt Sylvia was stroking her hair, cooing softly. Uncle Harrison was pacing back and forth across the Persian rug, muttering angrily about how the judges were blind, biased, and probably jealous of her natural talent. My parents were sitting on either side of her, looking devastated, as if a true tragedy had struck the household. "Mom? Dad?" I had whispered, my voice trembling. I held up the thick envelope. "I got in. I actually got in." My mother briefly glanced up, her expression strained and annoyed by the interruption. "That is nice, Genevieve. Put it on the kitchen counter. Can't you see your sister is going through a massive crisis right now? Have some empathy for once in your life. It is not always about you." I swallowed the heavy lump in my throat, the joy instantly turning to ash in my mouth. I walked to the kitchen and placed the letter gently on the cold granite island. The next morning, when I came down for breakfast, I couldn't find it. I panicked, searching everywhere. Finally, I found it in the recycling bin. Someone had used it as a coaster for their sticky coffee mug, leaving a dark, perfectly round brown ring right over the university's prestigious crest, and then casually tossed it away. That moment, that stained envelope, was Exhibit A in my internal museum of pain. Then there was my 21st birthday. A major milestone. I was still working 2 jobs while maintaining a full, grueling course load at college. I didn't ask for a party. We just had a small family dinner at a mediocre Italian chain restaurant. Uncle Harrison, who always fancied himself the wealthy patriarch of the family, made a big show of standing up and handing me a small, unwrapped gift from his pocket. It was a cheap, plastic keychain from a gas station. It was shaped like a cartoon bear and had a misspelled version of my name printed on it. "Happy birthday, kid," he had grunted, tossing it onto my plate next to my half-eaten pasta. "Don't spend it all in one place. Try to learn how to save some pennies." 2 months later, it was Vivian's 21st birthday. The family rented out a country club. Uncle Harrison proudly presented her with a small velvet box. Inside were the keys to a brand-new, silver BMW. He bragged loudly to anyone who would listen about how he had taken out a personal loan just to make his favorite niece smile on her special day. He walked her outside, and everyone clapped as she started the engine. The contrast was so sharp, the favoritism so blatant, it physically hurt to breathe. My achievements were always minimized, shrunk down until they were microscopic. My struggles, however, were always magnified and scrutinized. Whenever I saved enough money to buy myself something nice, like a good quality winter coat, Aunt Sylvia would make snide comments about how I was being financially irresponsible and living beyond my means. But whenever Vivian maxed out 3 different credit cards on designer clothes and luxury handbags, the family praised her for understanding fashion and investing in her personal brand. I learned to shrink myself to survive. I learned to keep my head down, to find solace in the dusty, quiet corners of university library archives and historical preservation rooms. Manuscripts did not judge me. Old, fragile documents did not tell me I was a disappointment or a financial burden. They just needed to be carefully preserved and understood, and I was exceptionally good at caring for things that others overlooked. I always thought that if I just worked hard enough, if I was just kind enough, patient enough, eventually they would see me. I craved their validation like oxygen. I wanted my sister to hug me and tell me she was proud of the woman I was becoming. I wanted my uncle to look at me with genuine respect instead of pity. I was so desperate for a real family connection that I was willing to accept the tiny, toxic scraps of affection they occasionally threw my way. Have you ever felt like a ghost in your own family? Like your achievements are threats to their fragile egos? Let me know in the comments, because what happened next is for all of us who have ever been forced to sit at the bottom. 7 years ago, the fragile dynamic of our family shattered permanently. The terrible car accident that took both of my parents happened on a rainy, miserable Tuesday evening. The grief was suffocating, a heavy blanket that made it hard to get out of bed. But the real shock, the moment that altered the trajectory of my entire existence, came 2 weeks later. We were all sitting in the cold, hyper-modern conference room of a prestigious downtown law firm. The air smelled of expensive leather and floor wax. "Gideon," My parents' chief trust attorney and a man made of sharp angles, tailored suits, and zero nonsense, sat across from us at the massive glass table. He read the last will and testament aloud to the family. To Vivian, Uncle Harrison, Aunt Sylvia, and the rest of the greedy vultures waiting for a payout, the reading was a massive, devastating disappointment. The document explicitly stated that the vast bulk of the estate was being liquidated and donated to various historical charities and educational foundations. My parents left behind a very modest sum to cover their own funeral expenses and a tiny, almost insulting monthly stipend for Vivian and me. Vivian threw a massive, unhinged tantrum right there in the law office. She screamed at Gideon, her face turning red, yelling about how selfish our parents were. She ranted about how she deserved massive seed money for her new wellness spa business, how she was owed a lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. Uncle Harrison stood up, slamming his fist on the glass table, threatening to contest the will entirely. He claimed my parents were clearly not of sound mind when they drafted it. Aunt Sylvia just cried loudly, complaining that she wouldn't be able to afford the mortgage on her boutique. I just sat there, entirely numb, listening to them complain bitterly about money while our parents were barely resting in the ground. But they didn't know the whole truth. They didn't know the genius of my father's paranoia. An hour after they stormed out of the building in a collective rage, Gideon quietly called me back into his private corner office. "Genevieve," he had said, his voice dropping its formal edge, becoming unexpectedly gentle. He slid a thick, heavy black leather folder across his polished oak desk. "That was the public will. The decoy. This is the private one." My parents were not blind. They knew exactly how greedy, toxic, and parasitic the extended family was. They knew Vivian would squander a massive fortune in a single year on useless luxury. They knew Uncle Harrison would gamble it away on terrible business investments or blow it on depreciating assets to inflate his own ego. So, they created a legal fortress. They left everything, every offshore investment account, every sprawling piece of commercial real estate, and the magnificent, priceless artifact collection solely and entirely to me. The total value was staggering. It wasn't just millions, it was tens of millions of dollars. The sheer number on the summary page made my head spin. They left me in absolute control, leaving behind a handwritten letter from my father tucked inside the folder. I can still recite the words from memory. "Genevieve, protect yourself first. Your family is a sinking ship, and they will drag you down if you let them hold the anchor. If you choose to help them, do it strictly from the shadows. Never let them know the source. They will never respect you if they know you have the power to feed them." Overnight, I became incredibly wealthy. But walking out of that law firm, staring at the bustling city streets, I also felt incredibly, profoundly lonely. Instead of cutting them off and living my own life, my desperate, ingrained need for a family kicked in. I was weak. I thought, maybe if they had absolute financial security, they would be happier. Maybe if they weren't constantly stressed about debts and mortgages, they would soften. They would be kinder to me. So, working closely with Gideon and Penelope, my brilliant financial manager, who became my closest friend, I constructed a massive, elaborate lie. We set up an anonymous trust, legally framing it as a long-forgotten, complex fund established by our late great-grandmother that had finally matured. Through this impenetrable trust, I began funneling $50,000 a month, every single month, directly into the family. It was a slow, steady drip of extreme wealth that instantly changed their lives. Vivian used her massive cut to launch her upscale spa chain. The business bled money from day one due to her terrible mismanagement, requiring me to secretly inject even more cash through anonymous shell LLCs just to keep her doors open and her pride intact. Uncle Harrison used his share to aggressively expand his luxury car dealership, constantly taking on bad, high-risk debt that I quietly erased behind the scenes. I watched them thrive on my dime. I watched them buy designer clothes, expensive cars, and huge houses. I watched Aunt Sylvia take a month-long, first-class trip to Paris. I remember sitting alone in my modest apartment, eating a cheap bowl of instant ramen, scrolling through her Facebook feed on a Friday night. She posted a photo posing in front of the Eiffel Tower, holding a shopping bag from Dior. The caption read, "Living my absolute best life." Some people just don't understand the value of experiencing the world and elevating their mindset. Looking at you, Genevieve. Get out of your dusty library, stop being so poor and depressed, and live a little. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. I paid for that plane ticket. I paid for the luxury hotel suite. I paid for the croissants she was eating. I paid for the international data plan she used to upload the photo to specifically insult me. The $5 million lie became my heaviest burden. Over 5 years, I poured over $8 million into their lives, hoping the extreme generosity would act as a slow-acting medicine to cure their toxic behavior. But it acted like a high-grade fertilizer instead. It made their egos grow monstrous and twisted. The richer they thought they were, the more they looked down on me. I became their designated failure, the pathetic yardstick they happily used to measure their own false, fabricated success. I thought money could buy a family. I thought my silent sacrifice would eventually, magically be rewarded with love. I was so incredibly naive. But on the night of my 30th birthday, sitting at that steakhouse table, listening to them laugh at my existence, a profound shift happened inside me. The desperate child craving their validation finally died, replaced by a cold, hard, unyielding clarity. The air in the private dining room was thick, suffocating with the smell of rich roasted meat, spilled red wine, and the cloying scent of Vivian's excessive perfume. I sat quietly, staring intently at the condensation dripping down the side of my crystal water glass, actively plotting my exit strategy. The family was loud now, their volume amplified by the expensive alcohol I had unknowingly funded. They were taking turns going around the table, aggressively reminiscing about their recent successes. It wasn't a conversation, it was a competitive sport. It was just a coded way of bragging while ensuring I felt as small and insignificant as humanly possible. Then, my phone buzzed sharply inside my leather purse. I slipped it out discreetly under the heavy tablecloth, shielding the bright screen with my hand. It was a high-priority text message from Winston. Winston was the general manager at Uncle Harrison's luxury car dealership. He was a sharp, fiercely honest man who had worked his way up from the service department. Over the years, he had grown increasingly suspicious of the dealership's chaotic finances. We had met in secret a few times at quiet coffee shops on the outskirts of the city. He was one of the very few people in the world who knew I was the silent owner of the massive commercial land the dealership currently sat on. The message on my screen read, "Genevieve, you need to see this immediately. I am so sorry. Check your secure email. Harrison just finalized a massive loan. It's worse than we thought. Please call me when you can." My blood ran completely cold, icing over my veins. I kept my face entirely blank, pretending to casually check a mundane work notification, and swiftly logged into my encrypted email server. Winston had sent highly classified, scanned copies of internal loan documents. I read through the digital pages, my eyes widening with every horrifying line. Uncle Harrison had not just taken out a normal, standard bank loan to cover payroll or inventory. Because his credit was secretly garbage, he had gone to a private, highly predatory lending group, essentially sophisticated loan sharks operating in tailored suits out of an unmarked office building. He had borrowed exactly $2.5 million at an astronomical interest rate. But that wasn't the part that made my stomach drop. To secure this massive, dangerous loan, he had forged legal documents. He had submitted falsified paperwork claiming he owned the commercial land free and clear. He had fraudulently used my property worth millions, as collateral for a high-interest loan from dangerous people. And what was this massive sum of money for? A vital business expansion? Upgrading the service bays? Hiring better staff? No. I opened the second attachment. The final invoice attached to the email thread was for a custom-built, luxury mega yacht. He bought a boat. A $2.5 million floating toy, bought with forged documents, risking the land I owned, jeopardizing my legal standing. I felt dizzy. I scrolled down further, my finger trembling against the screen. There was a forwarded email chain attached by Winston, showing a recent, candid conversation between Harrison and Vivian on the company server. Vivian had written, "Uncle H, making sure you pull an extra $150,000 from that new loan for me before the weekend. The downtown spa location desperately needs a full renovation, and Grandma's trust payment won't cover the imported Italian marble I want for the lobby. Don't worry about Genevieve finding out. She's too busy playing with her little antique books to understand how real money works." Harrison had replied less than 10 minutes later, "Done. Transferring it tomorrow. Let the peasants worry about the small details. We deserve this lifestyle." A physical, violent wave of nausea washed over me. I had to take a deep breath to stop myself from gagging. They weren't just financially oblivious. They were actively, intentionally malicious. They were colluding to drain resources they assumed were bottomless. They were committing actual felonies, risking serious legal trouble, and laughing at me behind my back while doing it. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement, the disgusting, bottomless greed of it all, finally snapped the very last, frayed string of hope I had been holding onto for 7 years. Earth to Genevieve. "Hello in there." Vivian's sharp, irritating voice yanked me violently back to reality. I looked up, blinking away the shock. She was standing right next to my chair, holding a cheap, plastic-wrapped sheet cake she had clearly bought at a discount grocery store on the way to this expensive restaurant. It had bright, garish neon frosting. It was a stark, intentional contrast to the gourmet food on the table. It was a visual, calculated insult. "Time for cake, birthday girl," she smirked, her eyes gleaming with malice. She forcefully pushed the cheap cake onto the table right in front of me. In doing so, she purposely bumped my arm, knocking over my full glass of ice water. The freezing cold water spilled directly onto my lap, soaking through my dress, freezing my skin. "Oh, so clumsy of me," Vivian laughed loudly, not sounding sorry at all. She quickly pulled out her phone, turning the camera directly on me while I sat there dripping wet. "Smile, sis. I need a picture for Instagram. I want to show my followers that no matter how successful you get, you should always remember where you came from and stay humble. You are the perfect example of staying humble at the bottom." She snapped the photo. The harsh flash blinded me for a second, leaving purple spots in my vision. The entire table erupted in loud applause and cruel, mocking chuckles. They were treating me like a pathetic zoo animal, a designated exhibit in their museum of superiority. I looked at Vivian, who was already typing out her cruel caption. I looked at Uncle Harrison, who was leaning back, casually browsing boat catalogs on his phone. I looked at Aunt Sylvia, who was fixing her bright red lipstick in a small compact mirror, ignoring me entirely. They were a sickness. A deep, rotting infection in my life. And I was the one who had been feeding the disease. I did not scream. I did not cry. I didn't even reach for a napkin to wipe the freezing, spilled water off my ruined dress. I sat perfectly still as a strange, terrifyingly cold calm settled over my entire mind. It was the absolute clarity of a surgeon preparing to amputate a deeply necrotic, unsalvageable limb to save the rest of the body. The frantic, anxious heartbeat in my chest slowed down, replaced by a steady, powerful rhythm. I slowly stood up. The heavy wooden chair scraped loudly against the polished hardwood floor, the harsh sound slicing through the room and instantly silencing the immediate laughter around the table. Everyone turned to look at me. Their faces held identical expressions of mild annoyance, fully expecting me to apologize for spilling the water, expecting me to shrink back down into my designated role as the family punching bag, or maybe run to the bathroom to cry like I used to when I was younger. "Thank you all for this lovely, unforgettable evening," I said. My voice was eerily quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the room, cutting through the heavy tension like a freshly sharpened scalpel. "It has been incredibly illuminating." Uncle Harrison scoffed loudly, not even bothering to look up from the yacht catalog on his phone screen. "Don't get dramatic on us, Genevieve. Sit down and eat your cheap cake. Someone has to eat it. Don't ruin the vibe." "No, thank you," I replied, calmly grabbing my leather purse from the back of the chair. I think I have had enough. Actually, I have had enough for a lifetime. Vivian aggressively crossed her arms over her chest, her smug, confident smile faltering just a fraction of an inch. Where exactly do you think you are going? We haven't even paid the bill yet. Don't tell me you expect us to cover your share? We all know you are practically living paycheck to paycheck. You can't just dine and dash on your own family. I turned slowly and looked dead into her eyes. The urge to reach across the table and slap her was overwhelming, but I knew I held a much better, far more destructive weapon in the palm of my hand. Don't worry about the bill tonight, Vivian, I said, keeping my tone deadly flat. I am sure you will find a creative way to pay it. You are, after all, a brilliant, self-made entrepreneur. I turned my back on her shocked face and began walking toward the heavy oak double doors of the private dining room. You walk out that door right now, you are proving how ungrateful you are. Uncle Harrison barked, his voice rising in anger. We bring you to a nice place, we include you in our lives, and this is how you act. This right here is typical loser mentality. This is why you will always be exactly where you are. I stopped with my hand hovering over the brass door handle. I slowly glanced over my shoulder one last time, taking in the sight of all 43 of them. You are right about one thing, Uncle Harrison. Someone has to be at the bottom. Enjoy the spectacular view from up here while it lasts. I pushed the heavy doors open and walked out into the brightly lit corridor. The doors swung shut behind me with a solid, satisfying thud, instantly cutting off their confused, angry mutters. I walked quickly past the bewildered waitstaff, ignoring their questions, and stepped into the waiting elevator at the end of the hall. The smooth, upbeat jazz music playing in the elevator felt incredibly surreal compared to the massive storm currently raging inside my head. I pulled out my phone. My hands, which had been shaking under the table for an hour, were now perfectly, rigidly steady. I opened my secure messaging app and clicked on the encrypted group chat I shared with Gideon, my fierce trust attorney, and Penelope, my financial manager. The chat was simply titled, The Contingency. We had planned for this exact scenario. Months ago, when I first started seeing the widening cracks in Vivian's business facade and Harrison's increasingly shady financial dealings, Penelope had begged me to cut the cord. Gideon had aggressively drafted the necessary legal paperwork. We created a strict, automated protocol. A digital red button designed to burn it all down. I typed 3 simple words. Execute Order 30. I hit send. Almost instantly, the screen showed 2 red receipts. 10 seconds later, the typing bubble appeared. Penelope replied, finally. I have been waiting for this for years. Initiating total shutdown sequence now. Grab some popcorn. Gideon replied right after, his message formal and terrifyingly efficient, all accounts frozen. Asset recovery protocols activated. Commercial lease cancellation notices are being auto-generated by the system. Legal notices of debt acceleration and fraud investigation will be served to Harrison tomorrow morning at exactly 8 a.m. Good evening, Genevieve. I locked my phone, leaned the back of my head against the cool, mirrored wall of the elevator, and closed my eyes. A massive, suffocating weight that I had been carrying for 7 long years instantly lifted off my chest. In its place rushed the terrifying, exhilarating thrill of absolute, calculated destruction. Order 30 was total financial annihilation. It meant instantly freezing the fake grandma's trust so not another dime would flow into their accounts. It meant aggressively liquidating the shadow LLCs that were holding Vivian's failing spa together. It meant pulling the commercial land lease on Uncle Harrison's dealership, effectively evicting him from the very property he had just fraudulently used as collateral for a mob loan. It meant taking a pair of scissors and cutting every single string I held, letting the puppets crash to the floor. By the time I stepped out of the restaurant and into the cool, chaotic night air of the city, the invisible wheels were already in motion. Algorithms were moving millions of dollars. Legal bots were sending certified, devastating emails. The invisible, golden safety net that had caught them every time they fell for 5 years was vanishing into thin air. I flagged down a yellow taxi. As I rode back to my building, watching the bright city lights blur past the window, I searched my heart. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. I felt nothing but a cold, calculating anticipation. They had laughed at my cheap clothes. They had mocked my small apartment. They had squandered my wealth to buy mega yachts and imported Italian marble while demanding I eat grocery store cake and smile for the camera. When the taxi pulled up and I stepped into the grand lobby of my building, the soft jazz music echoing off the marble walls reminded me of the tune from the restaurant elevator. I smiled for the first time all night. I knew, with absolute, unshakable certainty, that at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, the only music my family would hear would be the deafening, panic-inducing sirens of their own total financial ruin. If you are enjoying this dose of karma, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, the look on their faces when they showed up at my crappy apartment the next morning is something you will not want to miss. The next morning came incredibly fast, bathed in the sharp, bright sunlight of early autumn in the city. I was awake long before my alarm went off. In truth, I had barely slept at all. I was sitting at the massive marble kitchen island in my penthouse, wearing a silk robe, sipping a perfectly brewed cup of dark roast coffee. The city below me was just starting to wake up, the streets looking like tiny ribbons of gray far beneath my floor-to-ceiling windows. I felt an eerie sense of peace. The storm was coming, and for the first time in my life, I was the one controlling the lightning. At exactly 8:47 in the morning, my phone began to buzz violently against the marble countertop. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID flashed Vivian's name, accompanied by a picture of her pouting at a red carpet event I had secretly paid for her to attend. I let it ring. The phone stopped, then immediately started buzzing again. 8:48, 8:52, 8:56. She was relentless. The digital panic was palpable even through the screen. Finally, right as the clock struck 9, I casually reached out and swiped to answer. "What did you do?" Vivian did not say hello. She did not ask how I was. She just screamed into the receiver, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered panic. It was a sound I had never heard her make before. It sounded like a balloon rapidly deflating. "Good morning to you too, Vivian," I said, my voice smooth and entirely unbothered. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the rich flavor. What a pleasant surprise. What seems to be the problem so early on a Wednesday? "Do not play dumb with me, Genevieve," she shrieked, the sound forcing me to pull the phone slightly away from my ear. "The lawyer. The trust fund. The accounts. It is all gone." "What trust fund?" I kept my voice perfectly innocent, dripping with feigned confusion. "The one from Grandma. The one that pays out $50,000 every single month. I went to process payroll for the spa this morning and the bank told me the account was frozen. Then I checked my personal accounts. Everything is frozen. The trust payments just stopped without any warning." "Well, that is incredibly strange," I said, leaning back in my plush velvet bar stool. "Grandma's estate was fully settled years ago. She only left a few $1,000s, remember? You made quite a massive point of complaining about it at her funeral. You threw a fit because her antique jewelry was given to charity instead of you." But I have been getting regular payments for 5 years," she stammered, her breathing becoming heavy and erratic. "They said it was a delayed payout from her estate. They said it was a complex financial instrument that finally matured." "That must be some sort of clerical mistake," I said, echoing the exact tone she used to dismiss my achievements. "Maybe you should call the law firm and ask them to explain it to you. I am sure a brilliant, self-made entrepreneur like yourself can figure out a simple banking error." I did call them. "I called Gideon," she sobbed, the panic turning into genuine despair. "He said to talk to the benefactor. He said the anonymous benefactor has chosen to permanently redirect all the funds. Genevieve, my business loan payment is due tomorrow. If I do not have that trust money, the bank is going to seize the spa." "Anonymous benefactor?" I gasped, faking deep surprise. "Vivian, are you seriously telling me you have been receiving $50,000 a month from someone you do not even know? And you built your entire business empire relying on phantom money? That sounds incredibly financially irresponsible. Aunt Sylvia always says people should live within their means." Silence on the other end of the line. Dead, heavy silence. I could practically hear the rusty gears in her brain grinding, trying to process the horrifying implications of my words. It has to be from family money, she said weakly, her voice trembling. Our parents left everything to charity. Remember? You were very vocal about how selfish that was when they died. That is what they told us at the reading, I confirmed softly. But what? You just assumed there was secret money hidden away, and that someone was magically giving it to you for doing nothing, I said, letting a tiny sliver of ice bleed into my tone. I earned it. My business. Your business has never turned a single dollar of profit, Vivian, I interrupted, dropping the innocent act entirely. The spa is a black hole. It stays afloat despite hemorrhaging cash every single quarter. How exactly does that work? Did you really think you were that lucky? More silence. And then, the moment I had been waiting 7 long years for. It was you. Her voice was barely a fragile whisper, stripped of all its usual arrogance. I have no idea what you are talking about, I replied smoothly. I am just a pathetic renter who plays with old, dusty books, remember? I am stagnant. I belong at the bottom. How could a loser like me possibly have that kind of money? Before she could form a coherent response, my call waiting beeped. It was Uncle Harrison. Vivian, I have to go. Uncle Harrison is calling. Good luck with payroll, I said, and clicked over to the other line. Genevieve. Harrison roared into the phone. He sounded like a cornered animal. Did you do this? Gideon just sent over a notice of eviction. The bank is calling my commercial loan. They said the collateral is fraudulent. Good morning, Uncle Harrison, I said calmly. It sounds like you are having a rough day at the top of the food chain. Do not mess with me, he bellowed. Gideon said the owner of the land is pulling the lease. Who is the owner? I need a name. I need to fix this before the lending group finds out. You should really read the documents you forge more carefully, I advised him, taking another sip of coffee. Maybe you can sell that new mega yacht to cover the debt. Though I hear those depreciate terribly the second they touch the water. He gasped loudly. How do you know about the boat? I know everything, Uncle, I said quietly. I know about the forged signatures. I know about the mob loan. I know you and Vivian plan to steal an extra $150,000 to buy Italian marble. I know you both think peasants belong at the bottom. You own the land, he breathed out, the terrifying realization hitting him like a freight train. I own the land. I own the trust. I own the air you have been breathing for 5 years, I said, my voice hardening into steel. And as of right now, I am officially cutting off your oxygen. Have a nice day. I hung up and turned my phone entirely off. I walked over to the massive window, looking out over Central Park. They were scrambling right now. They were panicking. But I knew them too well. Their egos were too massive to just accept defeat over the phone. They would try to intimidate me in person. They would come to my cheap, tiny apartment to bully me into turning the money back on. And that was exactly what I was counting on. Will their arrogance survive the truth? Let me know what you think they will do next in the comments, because their reaction was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. Part 7. Stepping into the crappy apartment, 1,300 words. It took exactly 45 minutes for the intercom in my building to buzz. The concierge's voice crackled through the speaker, sounding slightly alarmed. Miss Genevieve? There is a very agitated group of people down here demanding to see you. They claim they are your family. Should I call security? No, Thomas, it is fine, I said, pressing the button to speak. Send them up to the penthouse. Let them use the private express elevator. Understood, ma'am. I turned around to face my living room. It was an expansive, open-concept space featuring rich mahogany floors, custom-designed Italian leather furniture, and a panoramic, unobstructed view of the Manhattan skyline. The walls were adorned with climate-controlled, glass display cases holding priceless, original historical manuscripts. There was a first-edition Virginia Woolf behind UV-protective glass and a handwritten letter by George Washington resting in a humidity-regulated vault built directly into the wall. It was a fortress of extreme wealth and refined taste, carefully hidden behind the address of a modest building. Sitting comfortably on my long leather sofa were Gideon, looking sharp in a charcoal suit, and Penelope, who was holding a tablet and grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Showtime," Penelope whispered, tapping her manicured nails against the back of her tablet. We heard the soft ding of the private elevator arriving. The heavy, polished steel doors slid open, depositing my family directly into my foyer. It was a full invasion force. Vivian was in the front, her makeup heavily streaked, her designer silk dress looking wrinkled and chaotic. Uncle Harrison was right behind her, his face flushed a deep, dangerous red, veins popping in his neck. Aunt Sylvia and Desmond trailed behind them, looking confused and terrified. They had clearly coordinated a massive ambush to bully the pathetic renter into submission. They stormed out of the elevator, ready to yell, ready to tear down my tiny studio apartment and demand their money back. But they stopped dead in their tracks. The silence that fell over the group was so sudden and profound it was almost deafening. It was like watching a movie hit the pause button. Uncle Harrison's jaw literally dropped. His eyes bulged out of his head as he slowly took in the vaulted ceilings, the massive crystal chandelier hanging over the dining area, and the stunning Ming Dynasty vase resting on a marble pedestal near the entrance. He looked down at the gleaming hardwood floors, then up at the floor-to-ceiling windows showing the sweeping views of the city. This was a $12 million penthouse. It was a space that made his luxury house look like a cheap motel. Vivian staggered backward a step, clutching her purse. She looked wildly around the room, her eyes landing on the display cases. She might not understand history, but she understood the universal language of extreme, untouchable wealth. The pathetic life they had mocked so ruthlessly just 12 hours ago was nowhere to be seen. "How?" Desmond breathed out, his eyes wide as saucers. He looked like he was going to pass out. "Welcome to my pathetic, tiny little shoebox," I said warmly, standing up from an accent chair. I smoothed down my simple, elegant cashmere sweater. "I would offer you all a drink, but I am afraid my budget situation is just too tight right now. You understand, being a peasant at the bottom and all." "Genevieve, what is this?" Aunt Sylvia whispered, her voice trembling. She looked terrified to even step onto the rug. "This is reality, Aunt Sylvia," I replied, walking slowly toward them. "This is the reality you all chose to ignore because it was much easier to treat me like garbage. Dad was significantly smarter than any of you gave him credit for. He saw right through your greed. And Mom's little manuscript collection? It turns out that original, signed Hemingway drafts are worth quite a bit on the private market. But you never said a word," Vivian stammered, her voice small and defensive. Her usual venom was completely gone, replaced by profound shock. "You let us believe you were poor. You lied to us." "I tried to tell you," I said, my voice hardening. "Remember Thanksgiving 3 years ago? I tried to tell you I had made some very successful investments. You interrupted me to make a joke about how I was probably investing in lottery tickets, and the whole table laughed. Or what about Christmas 2 years ago? I offered to help Uncle Harrison with his mortgage. He laughed in my face and said he did not need charity from a loser who couldn't even afford to buy a car." Harrison swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. The arrogant patriarch was suddenly looking very small. I did not know, Genevieve. If I had known. If you had known I was rich, you would have treated me with basic human decency?" I finished his sentence for him. "Because that is really what you are saying, Uncle. You are saying I only deserve respect if I have a massive bank account. None of you ever bothered to ask about my life. You just assumed, judged, mocked, and stole. We did not steal anything." Vivian suddenly flared up, her old defensive instincts kicking in. "Grandma left that money for the family. We were entitled to it." "Were you?" Gideon stood up from the sofa. His presence commanded immediate authority. He did not look angry. He looked like a predator analyzing its prey. He walked over to the glass coffee table and dropped a massive stack of thick, legally binding folders onto the surface with a loud, intimidating thud. "I believe it is time we correct some fundamental misunderstandings regarding your financial reality," Gideon said, his voice echoing in the large room. The trap was fully sprung, and they had walked right into the center of it. What would you do if your family showed up at your door demanding money? Would you let them in, or would you call security? Tell me your thoughts, because Gideon was about to show them exactly what happens when you cross the line. Part 8. Gideon's Hammer of Justice. 1,300 words. Gideon stood tall behind the glass coffee table, looking at my family with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing insects under a microscope. He was the perfect external validator. I could say I was wealthy all day long, but having a ruthless, high-powered Manhattan trust attorney standing in my living room holding their financial lives in his hands made the reality inescapable. Let us review the facts, shall we? Gideon began, his tone sharp and professional. He opened the first thick folder. For the past 5 years, my client, Genevieve, has been the sole benefactor and architect of the anonymous trust you all affectionately refer to as Grandma's Fund. There was no delayed payout. There was no miraculous maturity of an old bond. Every single dollar you received came directly from Genevieve's personal estate. Aunt Sylvia let out a loud, pathetic sob and buried her face in her hands. Desmond looked like he wanted to sink through the floorboards and disappear. Let us look at the numbers, Gideon continued, flipping a page. He loved numbers. Over 60 months, Genevieve has voluntarily distributed a total of $8.4 million to this family. The number hit the room like a physical shockwave. $8.4 million. Vivian, Gideon said, turning his piercing gaze to my sister. Your boutique spa chain has been technically insolvent since month 7 of operations. The only reason your doors are open, the only reason you have not declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy, is because Genevieve directed an anonymous LLC to purchase your toxic debt and inject $2 million in shadow capital into your operating budget. Vivian's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. She looked at me, her eyes wide with horror and a sick realization. The wellness empire she used to mock me was built entirely on my silent charity. And you, Harrison, Gideon turned to my uncle, pulling out a separate, red-tagged folder. You are perhaps the most egregious example in this room. You do not own the land your dealership sits on. Genevieve owns it. She has allowed you to operate rent-free for 5 years, saving you roughly $3 million in commercial leasing fees. Harrison gripped the back of a dining chair to physically support himself. His knuckles were white. All the color had completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly. Furthermore, Gideon's voice dropped an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. We are fully aware of the $2.5 million loan you secured yesterday from an unregulated lending syndicate. We possess the forged documents you submitted, falsely claiming ownership of Genevieve's land to secure that loan for a luxury megayacht. You hacked my emails. Harrison stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. That is illegal. I will sue you. I will take everything you have. I strongly advise against making empty threats, Harrison, Gideon replied smoothly, unbothered. The information was provided by a whistleblower within your own organization who was deeply concerned about your fraudulent activities. No hacking occurred. Just simple, devastating incompetence on your part. You cannot do this to us, Vivian cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. We are your family, Genevieve. You can't just pull the rug out from under us. We will lose our homes. We will lose everything. You will lose everything you never actually earned in the first place, I corrected her quietly. There is a massive difference between losing your life's work and losing a stolen fantasy. I am suing. Vivian shrieked, stomping her foot on the floor like a petulant child. She was desperate to regain any fraction of control. You manipulated us. You created a false sense of financial security. This is entrapment or fraud or something. I am getting a lawyer. Gideon actually smiled. It was a terrifying expression. He had been waiting for this exact moment. He thrived on dismantling arrogant threats. Please do, Vivian. Hire the best lawyer you can find, Gideon said, tapping the documents. However, before you file that ridiculous lawsuit, you should understand the legal countermeasure we have already prepared. He pulled out one final document and slid it across the table toward them. If you attempt to sue my client, or if you refuse to walk away quietly, Gideon explained, his voice laced with venom, Genevieve will formally reclassify every single dollar sent to you over the past 5 years. She will legally change the classification from gifts to callable commercial loans. We have the structural paperwork ready to file with the IRS. The room went dead silent again. Even Vivian stopped crying. If we reclassify the funds, Gideon continued, you will legally owe Genevieve $8.4 million, payable immediately, plus 5 years of accrued compound interest. Furthermore, Harrison, if we do not reach an amicable understanding today, my ethical obligations as an attorney will require me to forward your forged loan documents directly to the district attorney's office for a major felony fraud investigation. You will face up to 15 years in federal prison. Gideon closed the folder. The hammer of justice had fallen, and it crushed them entirely. Vivian was shaking uncontrollably. Uncle Harrison was staring blankly at the floor, realizing his entire life was over. The threats, the arrogance, the cruel laughter from the restaurant just a few hours ago, it was all gone, evaporated by the harsh, burning light of reality. Have you ever witnessed someone's ego get completely destroyed in real time? It is a complex feeling. Tell me below if you think Gideon went too hard on them, because the power dynamic was about to permanently shift. The silence in the penthouse was thick and heavy, suffocating the last remnants of their arrogance. They were trapped. There was no escape hatch, no rich relative to bail them out, no clever lie that could undo the mountain of evidence sitting on the glass table. Uncle Harrison finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked 10 years older than he had the previous night. The swaggering patriarch was gone, replaced by a terrified, broken man who realized he was standing on the edge of a massive cliff. Genevieve, please, Harrison choked out. His voice was a raspy whisper. If the bank calls my commercial loan because the lease is pulled, I am ruined. The lending syndicate, the people I borrowed money from for the boat, they are not the kind of people you just fail to pay back. They will come after me. They will hurt me. Then you should not have forged documents and stolen from your own family to buy a toy you couldn't afford, I replied. My voice was steady, void of any sympathy. You made your bed with criminals, uncle. Now you have to lie in it. I am not your shield anymore. We will pay you back. Vivian blurted out, her hands clasped together as if she were praying to me. I swear, Genevieve. We will budget. We will sell things. Just give us time. Do not shut off the accounts. Do not let the spa go under. Pay me back with what, Vivian? I asked, taking a step closer to her. You do not have any actual money. You have debt disguised as wealth. You have been living off my generosity while telling me I am a pathetic failure who belongs at the bottom. The spa is a black hole. It will never turn a profit because you refuse to actually work. I looked around at all of them. The power shift was absolute. I was no longer the invisible child, the designated punching bag. I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. You wanted to know what I do for a living? I asked, my voice rising, filling the room. I preserve things of value. I look at old, broken things and decide if they are worth saving. For 5 years, I tried to preserve this family. I poured millions of dollars and endless patience into you, hoping to fix what was broken. But you're not worth saving. You're just toxic waste. Penelope, who had been quietly watching the entire exchange, tapped her tablet screen and cleared her throat. Just a minor update for the group, Penelope said cheerfully, breaking the intense tension. She looked directly at my cousin Desmond. Desmond, I just pushed a notification to the primary investors of your tech startup. Since Genevieve's LLC was the lead anchor investor holding up your series of funding, our sudden withdrawal triggered a panic. Your other investors are pulling out. Your stock on the internal exchange just crashed by 80%. You might want to call your developers before they walk out. Desmond let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking violently as he looked at the flood of angry emails pouring into his inbox. His booming tech startup was dead in the water. You planned this, Aunt Sylvia whispered, looking at me like I was a monster. You set us up just to destroy us. No, Aunt Sylvia, I said, feeling a deep, profound sense of closure. I set up a safety net. You are the ones who chose to use it as a trampoline to jump higher so you could spit down on me. I didn't push you. I just moved the net. I walked over to the front door and opened it, gesturing toward the private elevator. The meeting is over, I announced. You have your instructions from Gideon. If you walk away quietly, you get to keep whatever scraps you can salvage from the wreckage of your own terrible decisions. If you fight me, I will bury you so deep in legal debt and criminal charges you will never see daylight again. Uncle Harrison slowly turned toward the door. He moved like a zombie. He didn't say another word. He just shuffled out into the elevator. Desmond followed him, staring blankly at his ruined phone. Aunt Sylvia cast one last hateful glare at me before scurrying after them. Vivian was the last to leave. She stood in the doorway, looking back at the $12 million penthouse, the priceless artifacts, the life she thought she deserved but could never have. We are family, Genevieve, she whispered, a final, desperate plea. How can you do this to your own blood? Family knows each other, I replied coldly. Family supports each other. Family does not spend 5 years turning their own sister into a punchline. Goodbye, Vivian. I closed the door gently in her face. The heavy lock clicked into place with a satisfying, final sound. The puppets were off the strings. When you finally stand up to your bullies, the rush is incredible. But the aftermath is always complicated. Stick around, because the next few months showed exactly what happens when karma collects its debts. The fallout was not immediate. It didn't happen overnight like a sudden explosion. Instead, it was a slow, agonizing demolition, a perfect domino effect where one terrible financial decision knocked over the next until there was nothing left but dust. Over the next 3 months, I watched from a safe distance as their carefully constructed, fraudulent lives crumbled into pieces. Uncle Harrison was the first to fall, and he fell the hardest. When Gideon officially pulled the commercial lease on the land, the bank immediately moved to foreclose on the dealership. They locked the gates and chained the doors. But that was the least of his problems. The private lending syndicate, the loan sharks he had borrowed $2.5 million from for the yacht, found out about the forged collateral. They did not send lawyers. They sent very large, very angry men to his house. To avoid having his legs broken, Harrison had to liquidate everything he owned. He sold his massive luxury home at a massive loss. He sold his wife's jewelry. He liquidated his retirement accounts. He barely managed to pay off the syndicate, but the process left him entirely destitute. The arrogant man who mocked me for renting was forced to move into a tiny, rundown studio apartment on the edge of the city. He eventually had to take a job as a floor salesman at a used car lot, working for minimum wage plus meager commissions, right back down at the very bottom where he claimed peasants belonged. Vivian fought the hardest to maintain her illusion, but gravity always wins. Without my shadow LLC pumping $200,000 a month into her spa chain, the business collapsed in less than 30 days. She could not make payroll. Her employees walked out. Her vendors sued her for unpaid invoices. The bank seized the commercial spaces. The crowning moment of irony happened on a random Tuesday afternoon. Vivian was having lunch at an outdoor cafe, trying to pretend everything was fine, when a repo truck pulled up and hooked up her silver BMW. She ran out into the street, screaming and crying, begging the driver to stop. Someone sitting at the cafe filmed the entire meltdown and posted it on Instagram. It went viral in our local social circles. The woman who loved taking humiliating photos of others to post online was suddenly the star of her own pathetic reality show. She had to move into Aunt Sylvia's spare bedroom. Desmond's tech startup officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. He had never actually written any viable code. He just liked playing the role of a CEO. Without my funding, the investors dug into his books and realized it was all smoke and mirrors. He was currently working at a cell phone repair kiosk in a dying shopping mall, paying off massive personal debts. Aunt Sylvia managed to keep her boutique open, but just barely. Without the extra $50,000 a month, she could no longer afford her lavish lifestyle. There were no more trips to Paris. There were no more designer handbags. She had to fire her staff and work the cash register herself, standing on her feet for 10 hours a day. As for me, my life became infinitely quieter and significantly more peaceful. I didn't change my lifestyle much. I still worked at the archives, appraising historical documents because I genuinely loved the work. I still drove a sensible car. I still enjoyed quiet evenings reading in my penthouse. But the suffocating weight of their judgment was gone. The air in my lungs felt cleaner. Something interesting started to happen around the 6-month mark. The total isolation they faced from society, because people quickly realize when the money dries up, forced them to look inward. I received a long, handwritten letter from Winston, the dealership manager who had warned me. He thanked me for the generous severance package I had secretly arranged for him and the honest employees when the dealership closed. He had used the money to start his own small, ethical auto repair shop, and he was thriving. Then, unexpectedly, I got a text message from Desmond. "Hey Genevieve. I know you do not owe me a second of your time, and I am not asking for money. I just wanted to say I am sorry. I was arrogant and stupid. I am working real hours now, and I finally understand how hard you worked to get where you are. I hope you are doing well." I didn't reply, but I didn't block his number either. It was a tiny, microscopic step toward genuine humility. A month after that, Aunt Sylvia sent a simple greeting card. It didn't ask for a loan. It just said she missed our old family dinners before money poisoned everything. They were learning the lesson I had tried to teach them for years. They were learning what it meant to budget, to struggle, and to work for things instead of having them handed to them by someone they didn't even respect. They were learning how to survive at the bottom. The family dynamic was broken forever, but in its place, small, fragile seeds of reality were starting to take root in the wreckage. Would you ever forgive family members who treated you this way if they genuinely apologized? Or is the bridge burned forever? Let me know, because the final confrontation with my sister was something I will never forget. Vivian was the absolute last person to reach out to me. It took nearly a full year after the catastrophic birthday dinner for her to swallow her massive pride. I received an email from her on a rainy Tuesday morning. It was brief and surprisingly polite. She asked if I would be willing to meet her for a quick coffee. She explicitly stated that she was paying, and she promised not to ask for a single dime. Curiosity, and perhaps a tiny, lingering ghost of sisterly affection, made me accept. We met at a small, unassuming diner on the outskirts of the city, far away from the expensive downtown spots she used to demand we frequent. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple pair of jeans and a plain gray sweater. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled, it was pulled back in a messy clip. The expensive, arrogant glow she used to carry had faded, leaving behind a tired, very ordinary-looking 31-year-old woman. She looked exhausted. I slid into the vinyl booth across from her. She looked up, her eyes nervous and bloodshot. "Thank you for coming, Genevieve," she said softly, wrapping her hands around a chipped ceramic coffee mug. "I know you had zero obligation to see me." "You are welcome, Vivian," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "How have you been?" She let out a bitter, self-deprecating laugh. "I am working as a shift manager at a retail clothing store. I stand on my feet for 9 hours a day folding sweaters. I take the bus because I still owe the bank for the car they repossessed. I live in Aunt Sylvia's tiny guest room." She looked down at her hands. The expensive manicures were gone, her nails filed short and unpolished. "I am learning how the real world works," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "It is terrifying. And it is exhausting. I do not know how you did it for so long while going to school." "I did it because no one gave me a choice," I pointed out quietly. "I know." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "I have been doing a lot of thinking, Genevieve. About that night at the steakhouse. About the cake. About the things I said to you." She took a deep, shaky breath, fighting back tears. "I was a monster to you. I was so incredibly jealous of your intelligence, your focus, your independence, that I used the money I now know is yours, to create a fake reality where I was better than you. I needed you to be a failure so I could feel like a success. It was disgusting. And I am so profoundly sorry. I am not sorry that I lost the money. I am sorry that I lost my sister. I sat there, listening to the clatter of dishes in the diner kitchen, processing her words. For the first time in her entire life, she sounded genuine. The apology wasn't a manipulation tactic. It was the desperate confession of someone who had hit rock bottom and finally opened their eyes. I appreciate your apology, Vivian, I said slowly, choosing my words with extreme care. And I believe you mean it. Her face lit up with a fragile, desperate hope. Does that mean, can we try to be sisters again? Can we start over? I looked at her, feeling a deep sense of calm. No, Vivian. We cannot start over. The hope shattered on her face, replaced by a quiet devastation. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting, I explained gently but firmly. I forgive you for the cruelty, because holding on to that anger is only poisoning me. But the trust is completely gone. You cannot abuse someone for years, mock their pain, steal their resources, and then expect to just hit a reset button when you finally learn your lesson. Actions have permanent consequences. I wish you the best, I truly do. But my life is peaceful now, and I am not going to invite the chaos back in. She nodded slowly, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. She didn't argue. She didn't yell. She just accepted the reality of the boundary I was enforcing. I understand, she whispered. I stood up, leaving a $20 bill on the table to cover the coffees, despite her promise to pay. Old habits die hard. Take care of yourself, Vivian, I said. I walked out of the diner and into the cool, refreshing rain. I felt lighter than I had ever felt in my entire life. As for the rest of my family, each relationship evolved differently over the next few years. Uncle Harrison never recovered his wealth or his pride. We exchanged generic holiday cards once a year, but nothing more. My cousins split into two distinct camps, those who genuinely wanted to rebuild a distant but polite relationship, and those who disappeared from my life entirely, unable to face the burning shame of their past behavior. And me? I still live in my penthouse. I still work with my ancient manuscripts, preserving history. I still drive a sensible car. The only major difference is that now, when someone asks me what I do for a living, I tell them the absolute truth. I preserve stories. Both the ones written in fragile books and the ones written in real lives, including my own. The birthday toast Vivian gave me, to our pathetic sister who still rents, turned out to be pathetic, just not in the way she meant. I do still rent, in a philosophical way. I rent space in people's lives. And now, finally, they are earning that space with something far more valuable than trust funds or luxury cars. They are earning it with genuine respect. And that is worth more than all the money in the world. Some people tell me I went too far by dropping the hammer and letting them lose everything. Others say I didn't go far enough and should have pressed criminal charges. So, I leave it to you, the jury. Was I too harsh in letting them fall to the bottom, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let me know your verdict in the comments. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, or if you just love seeing karma do its job flawlessly, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It helps the channel more than you know. Stay strong and never let anyone put you at the bottom.